In 1987, the owner of a small lingerie shop was closing up for the night, looking forward to a busy evening of plans ahead. Plans she would never make it to. When her brother came by later, he found her body inside the store. Investigators believe she was ambushed by someone pretending to be a customer, trapped inside of her own business. She fought hard for her life and injured her attacker in the process. Now, 38 years later, her murder remains unsolved, but with the amount of physical evidence collected, this may be one of the most solvable cases I've ever covered. A case that could finally see justice with the right tip. Today, I'll walk you through Gale's story and the hidden dangers faced by retail workers like her. I'm your host, Megan, and each week on A Simpler Time True Crime, I cover older unsolved cases and challenge the idea that a simpler time means a safer time. This week, I'm bringing to you the unsolved murder of Gale Green. There isn't a whole lot of public information out there on Gale Green. Her case hasn't been covered very much at all over the years, and most of the information I have comes from old newspaper reporting in the Tucson area and their interviews with her brother David. But as I was reading about her, I noticed some reoccurring themes. She was incredibly generous and giving, a very hard worker and entrepreneur, and she was always trying to coach other women and empower them. Gale was a lead member of an organization called Resources for Women, Inc. In late September of 1987, just 2 weeks prior to her murder, Gale organized a large event called the Women's Expo of '87, a huge event at a hotel that showcased Southern Arizona women-owned businesses, which you see more of nowadays. And there's more of a societal push to support small businesses, women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, etc. But I think this was pretty ahead of its time in 1987. And lest you think that this was just a bunch of vendor tables, I mean, don't get me wrong, there were 100 of those, but it was so much more. It was a full-day event with breakout sessions, and there was topics covered such as effective business writing, the rules around drug testing in the workplace and dispelling those myths, personal money management, taming the advertising beast, desktop publishing, and the day ended with a lingerie fashion show from Temptations, the business that Gale owned. Gale had a passion for business, and that's what she poured her heart and soul into. At 40 years old, she had run her own store for about a year. Prior to that, she had a winding path that led her there. Gale was born in New York and attended high school there, where she was voted best dancer in her class. She moved to Arizona in the late 1960s. Her brother David was 3 years younger than her, and in 1971, she convinced him to move across the country with her. The two were very close, and they talked on the phone almost daily. When she first moved there, she worked at a downtown Tucson record shop. David described her as a free spirit, and she loved music and reading. Gale had entered into direct sales with Avon, and then began working at a lingerie business for years. She found that she was really good at sales, and had the business acumen needed for success, so she decided to branch out on her own, and she began planning for that. Gale had been with her husband for 10 years. He's sometimes referred to as Terry Tucker and sometimes referred to as Michael Tucker, but mostly Michael, so I'm going to refer to him as that for consistency purposes. The two had no children, and they had a solid marriage from what I could find. Michael was also friends with her brother David. He helped Gale to fulfill her dream. They purchased a home and converted it into a commercial property for her to open her shop. I'll have a picture of it on the flyer for her case. It's on our Instagram at simplertimecrimepod. Just as a point of clarification, it wasn't one of those setups where they lived in the same place as where the business was. They had a separate home. It's just that rather than this being in a traditional commercial space, Satisfactions was located in a home that had been converted into a commercial property. As I said, the business was called Satisfactions, and it was a lingerie and novelty boutique. It was located on North Country Club Road near East Glen Street in Midtown Tucson. The place that was once the converted retail spot is just an empty plot of land now. But in the year Gale had to run it, she had built up her reputation as a businesswoman. Not only did she sell items out of her store, she did private parties in people's homes. She had repeat clientele, and she catered to upper-class business professionals. While a lot of her focus was towards women, it was not uncommon for her to have men come in looking to buy that special something for their wife or girlfriend. The sales and momentum allowed for her to have 5 other sales associates she hired to do community-based sales, while she typically held down the brick-and-mortar location. And on the evening of Friday, October 9th, Gale was working in the store alone. She was planning to close the store around 6 p.m. After that, she was going to meet her husband Michael and brother David for a drink before heading to a private party to sell lingerie in a home at 7:30. David and Michael met up as planned, but Gale never showed. They initially weren't very worried. Gale was really committed to customer service, and if she was about to close up and a customer walked in, she'd always wait and assist them with whatever they needed. Because this was the late 80s and there was no easy way to reach her husband by phone, this type of delayed communication was much more common than our current day constantly on-call plugged-in status. So the 2 men had their drinks, assumed that Gale had run late and gone straight to the private party that night, and they eventually went home as well. Michael had another beer and watched some TV at home before falling asleep on the couch. He woke up in a daze in the early morning hours of October 10th and was concerned to see that Gale hadn't returned home yet. At this point, it was around 12:30 a.m. Michael's car was having trouble, so he called his brother-in-law David and let him know that Gale hadn't returned yet and he was worried. He asked if his brother-in-law could stop into the shop and see if she was there for some reason. David was very protective of his sister, so he answered yes without hesitation. But he later told the papers he wasn't exactly expecting to find much of anything when he got to the store. But as he pulled into the lot outside, things felt a little eerie and off. The lights were still on in the shop. Why would Gale still be there? More than 6 hours after the shop was supposed to have closed, David opened an unlocked door and grew concerned right away. Part of the store was in disarray. And then he discovered the unimaginable. The body of his sister in the hallway leading to the back of the store's back rooms. She had clearly been the victim of a violent attack, and David called police and Michael right away. Those closest to Gale were heartbroken and shocked. They couldn't think of anyone who would want to do her harm. One customer told the Arizona Daily Star that Gale was really sweet and she was just feeling numb about all of it. Another woman named Cindy, who worked at Satisfactions, told the Arizona Republic, quote, "This lady went out of her way for everybody. She knew most of her customers by first name. She had no enemies as far as I knew, none." She also added, quote, "She was real considerate. She kept a bucket of toys in there so that when my kids came in, they had something to play with. Even though she didn't have any kids of her own, she liked them," end quote. Her brother David said that Gale poured everything, her heart and soul, into this business and that it was a huge part of her life. Donna Reed, the president of Resources for Women, Inc., the networking business group that Gale was a large part of, she spoke highly of Gale too. She told the Tucson Citizen, quote, "Gale was like a flower opening. She was ready to grow and to learn and to expand. She had such a wholesome, positive attitude toward life. Her business was doing better than it had from the beginning. She was working for her own professional, spiritual, and personal development and doing well at every level, end quote. But despite all of this, one other piece kept coming up, that Gale's husband Michael had worried about Gale working alone there. And now that his fears had come true, there would be a ripple effect in Gale's circle. I want to take a quick moment to thank you for tuning into this week's episode. It's so appreciated seeing my weekly listeners tune in each week, and it's been a while since I've done a mid-episode appreciation line because I try to speed the intermissions up now that I have some ads. But I want you all to know that I see you, I appreciate you. I love having conversations about the cases and all of your case suggestions you send to me. You've really helped me look into cases that I had never heard of and raise awareness for them. So please keep it up, please stay in touch, and please keep sharing this podcast with a friend. And now back to the show. Cindy, Gale's colleague, told the papers that Gale's husband Michael was always worried about her working in that location alone. And it's understandable. The location of Satisfactions was in a small, former single-family home on a mostly residential street. It was set back from the street, and so for a commercial space, it seemed a bit isolated. Michael was so concerned that he purchased Gale a pistol to have on her. It's unclear if she had it on her that day. According to those who knew her best, she almost teased about it and joked about doing karate lessons, saying she felt perfectly safe. Beyond the relatively isolated location, though, was also the products she was selling. Being a lingerie shop, Gale would share stories of creepy callers and shoppers who would stop in and give her the creeps, though she felt they were mostly harmless. Now, members of her business collective were shaken up, including her own employees. Donna Reed, president of Resources for Women, said that Gale was, quote, a very sensible, level-headed woman, and that women were thinking, if it could happen to her, what's to stop it from happening to me? 2 of her colleagues promptly enlisted their phone numbers. Others in the group thought that the killer might have their directory from the big event that had recently been hosted, and that he might find them. One member of the group said that they had reevaluated the location for their new business in favor of one more populated with other storefronts. Another single mother business owner in the group was physically sick with anxiety over it. One woman named Brenda, who was part of the collective, said that women often made nighttime appointments at the convenience of their customers, but they were determining if they should keep doing this or if they should have some sort of backup plan of checking in on one another. They emphasized that Gale was very street smart, so she must have been completely surprised by her attacker. With everyone on high alert, detectives got to work trying to make sense of the crime scene and what happened that evening. And early on, detectives were quiet about revealing too much about the crime. They simply revealed that Gale had been beaten to death and that they were canvassing the area, looking to talk to colleagues of Gale and looking for witnesses to come forward. And that's just what they did for weeks. Investigators interviewed dozens of people, and in late December, they did their first major update in the case. Detective John Kessler appealed to the public for information on a potential suspect who had been seen in the Satisfactions lingerie shop on the evening of the murder. The man was said to possibly be named Chris. He was 20 to 40 years old, 5'8" with dark hair and a slim build. The man limped on his left side and was said to have a Canadian accent. This man sold computer paper to area businesses and drove a white or beige van. Detective Kessler stated that investigators had revealed that this lead came up in part not just because of the eyewitness tip, but also by analyzing business records of sales, clients, and vendors. A composite sketch was drawn of this man and taken to the other lingerie shops in the area, including one in Phoenix, and store clerks there recognized the man as a frequent customer as well as a vendor. Lastly, they said the person may live in Peoria, Arizona. After the temporary boost in the case, it again went quiet for a bit. That was until the summer of 1988, when an arrest and a string of sexual assaults brought out a new suspect. From March of 1986 to June of 1988, the southern Arizona area was being terrorized by a sexual predator dubbed the leasing agent rapist or rental agent rapist. He had gone on a crime spree of 13 sexual assaults in the Phoenix and Tucson areas. His nickname stemmed from his approach to the crimes. He would set up meetings with leasing agents to view apartments or vacant office space areas. Once alone with them, he would brandish a weapon, either a small caliber gun or a knife. He would typically tie them up, sexually assault them, and threaten to kill them. It took time for the different jurisdictions in this general area to make the connection that they had a serial predator on their hands. But once they did, they developed a task force. The man was said to be well-spoken, well-kept, dressed professionally, he drove a nice vehicle, and he asked a lot of appropriate questions, and so these women were at ease. One of my earlier episodes on this podcast where I discussed real estate agents, I talked about the Michelle Anglin murder out of also Arizona, and one of the things that tipped off another potential realtor victim on that same day was that the man posing as a buyer, James Van Adams, was asking questions not related to a sale. Instead of info on the house, he was asking, are these your typical hours? Do you work alone? I digress just a bit there to give a quick tip that can be a potential red flag in these situations. Though again, in the case I'm talking about today, the man was asking the right questions. So back to this guy, the leasing agent rapist. By early summer of 1988, police from the task force had released a composite sketch of the man and talked about some of the cars he drove. And actually, this man's neighbor called the tip line and said, that looks a lot like my neighbor. And the wife of the guy's best friend also said to her husband, honey, that looks a lot like Randy. Police began closing in on him as a suspect. They found handwriting samples of his from a car accident report and compared it to some of the leasing agent logs and felt it was a match. This gave them the warrant for fingerprints, blood, saliva, hair, and pubic hair samples. In July of 1988, Randy Wedding was apprehended. He was a 33-year-old married father of 3 children and co-owner of an architect business. His best friend was interviewed for the paper, and he was shocked. The best friend and business partner said he was the wild one, and he would be one to go to topless bars, and he said he wouldn't have even dreamed of asking Randy. Randy was so in love and committed to his wife that he would correct you if you made crude jokes or were flirty with other women. He was known as a devout member of a Methodist church. This friend described him as level-headed, the one who would remain calm in tense situations, and that he was a dedicated father. Ultimately, Randy Wedding pleaded guilty and did not pursue a jury trial. He stated that he secretly had an addiction to pornography and that he was spending about $300 a month on it. He said something got out of control and he just couldn't stop the sexual assaults. He also warned that there were more people out there like him with the same sickness in their heads. With his arrest, the detectives investigating Gale Green's case wanted to give him a hard look. They said it wasn't a home run, but they'd be stupid not to look into it. And I mentioned the leasing agent rapes, but there are a couple of more cases that he's allegedly tied to, and they break the pattern he had been following up to this point. In September of 87, just weeks before Gale's murder, a maid was cleaning an apartment building when she was attacked from behind, and a man matching Wedding's description tried pulling her clothes off. She fought back and he took off running. That very same evening, the same man entered a store in the 2900 block of East Grant Road and pointed a gun at the store clerk. He forced her to undress, sexually assaulted her, and left. This was less than a mile from where Gale Green would be murdered just a couple of weeks later. Not only that, the vehicles that Wedding drove resembled one seen nearby the shop on the day of her murder, and he looked similar to a composite sketch of a customer seen in the store that day. At this point, in July of '88, police stated that they had 4 suspects total, presumably the man they called Chris, who delivered papers, and Randy Wedding. They declined to name the other 2 suspects. It was also at this point that they revealed that they had the killer's fingerprints and that they would be comparing them, but because this was pre-APHIS and CODIS, it would be a manual process and it would take weeks. The next update from police would come in January of 1989. And at this point, 15 months after the murder, they began to talk in a bit more detail about the crime, hoping to get people to come forward. One such detail was how they believed the crime had progressed that evening. According to Tucson Police Detective Joseph Godoy, Gale Green was getting ready to leave when a customer came in right around closing time, somewhere around 5:45 to 6:15-ish. A sales associate was driving by that night and thought about stopping in, but declined when she saw a vehicle, a tan-colored van nearby the parking area next to the shop, and driving away. This associate thought that Gale might be busy finishing up with a customer and she didn't want to disturb things. Just for a quick point of clarification, because that gets a little confusing sounding, some of the source material says that she just saw the vehicle driving away. Some of it talks about her seeing like a man going in and the vehicle parked there. So it's a little convoluted. I can't tell if there was 2 separate witnesses that saw 2 separate things, or if some of the source material just kind of blends together. Detective Godoy said it was obvious that a struggle had begun around Gale's desk in the front showroom. He said that it continued into what had once been a kitchen, and from there it led to the rear part of the hallway. He said that he believed that Gale Green was killed while resisting a rape attempt and that nothing, no merchandise, and no money was missing from the store. So police now reveal that this is a sexually motivated crime and that robbery was not a motive. Furthermore, it was believed that when the suspect came in, Gale had been ironing lingerie for the show that evening. Next to the register were 2 wrapped gift boxes with a receipt filled out. Police have never revealed what was in the boxes, but they said they believed that the assailant had told Gale that he wanted to purchase those items for someone and that she had been gift wrapping them. It's then believed that the suspect tried to sexually assault Gale, and she fought back. She seemingly grabbed the iron she was using and hit the suspect, likely in the head or face. Police then surmised that the suspect was able to wrestle the iron away from Gale and beat her to death with it. Gale's blood was found on the iron, but so was the suspect's. Detectives said they had a fair amount of physical evidence, both fingerprints and blood from the suspect, but that at that time they needed to have a person to compare it to. So I already know what you're thinking. Okay, Megan, what about those 4 suspects? Well, let's start with Chris, the one who Detective Godoy said was who he thought was his best suspect in the case. He was the paper salesman who was known to frequent Satisfactions and other lingerie stores. The sales associate who saw the van that night had actually remembered a partial plate. After digging into DMV databases and asking for public assistance in finding the man, they did. But the detective told the Tucson Citizen that right away in his interview with Chris, he just knew he wasn't their guy. Still, to be thorough, he compared his blood type and fingerprints, and it was not a match. And as it turned out, Chris had been in Tucson that day, but it had been the morning, not the evening. While no articles explicitly rule out Randy Wedding, it's assumed that after they must have, because they said they were going to do those fingerprint comparisons, and here we are all these years later without a match, so it couldn't have been him. And, just to be clear, they ruled Gale's husband out as well. Detectives had hit a wall. They shared that they believed the injury the killer sustained might have been significant, possibly needing stitches, so they released the information hoping that someone who may have treated him would recognize it. What stinks is that might have been a better question to ask right off the bat. I have a hard time imagining a hospital worker would remember giving stitches over a year later. Detectives characterized the crime scene and killer as disorganized, theorizing that he didn't come there to murder her, but to sexually assault her, and when things got out of hand and she fought back, he lashed out in a rage. Gale's husband became withdrawn, and after her murder, he would only talk to police about the case. As such, Gale's brother David became the champion of keeping her case alive. At the 3-year mark, he was interviewed, and he talked about how frustrating it was not having answers, how he thought about it every day and would for the rest of his life, and how it had finally dawned on him that this case may never be solved. But David didn't give up. Nearly 20 more years would pass before Gale's name would reappear in the news cycle. Cold case detectives in 2009 were taking a fresh look. The new detective on the case shared that they still had great physical evidence, and if they could just match it to someone, they would have an amazing case against the suspect. But the new detective revealed that they had run the prints and blood samples through all the national databases and had not gotten a hit. He said, quote, "We are contacting many people to determine whether they are owners of the DNA. We are taking samples from those people and in the process excluding some," end quote. I found the language excluding some interesting. While I doubt there's a match or we would know, I get the sense that maybe some people have not been forthcoming with their DNA, but that's just my guess. In that 2009 article, David Green said, quote, "I think about it every day. There is no explanation for it. It's just one of those real hard things I've had to deal with in my life. I would just say if someone knows something, they should report it to the police so they can find this person and hold him responsible. Make him pay." 15 more years would pass, and in October of 2024, there was another push for closure in her case. A few different news stations ran pieces on her case for visibility. Still, with all the DNA evidence, they have not had any hits. In an interview with the local Channel 13 news station, 2 of the cold case detectives talked vaguely about pursuing new forensic options. And my hope is that there is potential for this case to be solved with genetic genealogy. Given that there hasn't been a hit, either this person was one of those one-and-done killers, or possibly they died before ever having their DNA collected. But these types of advanced DNA testing, it's expensive and there isn't always a lot of places that do it, and offices have limited resources to be able to pursue it. There are nonprofits like Season of Justice that provide advanced DNA testing for free, as long as police departments initiate the request and are willing to have the evidence sent to a private lab. So Tucson PD, if you're listening to this episode, please consider doing this to help resolve this case. And listeners, that's where you come in. Please share this episode and Gale's story. It's been left out of the media so much, and when there is increased pressure from people to solve a case, sometimes that can help bump a case up in line to get testing done. Obviously, I want everybody's cases solved in a perfect world. But in the meantime, I'm really hoping that there is a sliver of justice and answers out there waiting in Gale's case. Before I wrap up this episode, I do just want to draw attention to some of the very real lived experiences of people who work retail in general, but particularly in this industry, such as places like Victoria's Secret or other lingerie adjacent stores. I'll link some different articles and Reddit threads in the show notes, but it's surprisingly common. A lot of times it's phone calls, but sometimes it's people and regulars who show up in the store. It's possible that Gale was murdered by someone who intended to be a shopper that night, but got opportunistic. Or that possibly it was one of the people she described to her brother as quote-unquote perverts who came into the store. Retail is not an area of expertise of mine, so I thought another action item from my listeners would be, if you're someone who has worked in retail, especially someplace like this, comment on the episode on Spotify or on the Instagram post. Share tips for fellow listeners to stay safe in these situations, or what protocols your workplaces have put in place. The safest thing would be for these creepy men to just leave women alone, but in absence of that, I'd love my listener community to care for one another in this way and keep each other safe. If you have any information on the murder of Gale Green, please contact the 88 Crime Tip line, 520-882-7463. There's also a mobile app. It's called P3 Tips, and there's a website, www.88crime.org. You can remain anonymous, and at the time of this recording, there is a $2,500 reward for information. This has been another episode of A Simpler Time True Crime. If you appreciate the work I'm doing, please leave a 5-star review on your favorite listening platform. If you wish to support the show monetarily, consider joining my Spreaker supporter club. I have so many plans for it soon, and I appreciate you all so much. Case suggestions can be made to simplertimecrimepod@gmail.com. And as always, thank you so much for listening, and join me again next Monday.